Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our roundtable guests. Professor Dr. Sheila Blumen. She is full professor and main researcher at the Pontifical Catholic University of Peru, PUCP, and author of numerous book chapters and scientific articles. Furthermore, she is specialized in working with highly able children, director of the foundation Future Minds, and carries out consultancies for the Ministry of Education and institutions interested in the development of creativity and talent as a strategy for innovation and development. Please also welcome Dr. Narayan Desai, who graduated as an ecologist and has a doctorate in the restoration of ecology, plus another one in Vedic and Puranic literature. He is the founder of Tribal Mensa Nurturing Program in India, which is an emerging chapter of Mensa International and is an initiative working to identify and nurture gifted children among tribal population in India. Please also welcome Kondo Mutulai Muli, who was born and raised in Kenya. His father was an extremely successful entrepreneur and later became a celebrated philanthropist. Nondo works as a board director for the Mully Children's Family Canada, which is a registered Canadian charity committed to supporting the rescue and rehabilitation programs of Mully Children's family in Kenya. And last but not least, please welcome Professor Dr. János Győri, who is a full professor at Eötvös Loránd University, Budapest, Hungary. Here he is working for the Faculty of Education and Psychology, Institute for Intercultural Psychology and Education. In the last 10 years, he collected data in detail on more than 30 talent development programs all over the world and published about these programs in 3 volumes in Hungarian and English. He is going to be the moderator of the roundtable discussion titled Talent Management Practices for Children in Extreme Poverty and Risk.
So welcome everybody. Our guest is Professor Dr. Sheila Blumen, Dr. Narayan Desai, and Nondo Mutulai Muli. And the topic what we are talking about today in this roundtable is, let me say, a demanding topic because we are talking about gifted students who live and grow up in extreme poverty and danger. I tell you some examples from this. For you it will be familiar, but maybe not for all the audiences. They are the children who grow up on the streets, so street children, orphan children, abandoned children, abused children, physically and sexually as well, children from juvenile environments, homes and government rehabilitation centers, child laborers, children with serious physical disabilities, destitute children, child mothers, ex-commercial sex workers, HIV infected and affected children, and children living in war zones. So this is not the typical population which about we used to talk in our conferences, because this is not the children who lag behind. I mean, the family lags behind. Not the children who grow up in some kind of needs, but these are children in serious danger and in serious life circumstances. And today we try to talk about the ways we can support them in gifted education programs. So let me ask you at first about your professional career, about your work at home. And please, in this first round, don't mention your main program. Naturally, we will talk about those programs later. So who starts? Maybe in alphabetic order. I mean the family names. Sheila, you can start.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well, hello everyone. I'm honored to be part of this important panel and appreciate the invitation very much. I'm Sheila Blumen, professor of psychology, an editor-in-chief of the Academic Journal of Psychology at my university, which is the Pontifical Catholic University in Peru. Along my professional career, I've been linked to the field of education, first as an elementary teacher. I taught reading and mathematics in elementary school, and afterwards as a social science middle school teacher. Since the beginning of my practice as a licensed psychologist, I was involved in psychoeducational assessments, both for Peruvian and international population. We have an important group of migrants here in Peru coming from different Latin American countries. And also with the development of teacher training programs and counseling programs for students with special learning needs. That's how I entered the field of gifted education. As a researcher, I lead a research group called Crea Talentum, focused on creativity, technology, and talent development. Also, I collaborate as a consultant for the Ministry of Education in my country and professor and invited professor in different universities. As a mother, I have seen the need to include intervention services for the gifted in the general stream of education, and I think that was my main motto to enter also the public service. Yeah, I'm not gonna talk about what I do in gifted education, so I think I have given kind of a broadened spectrum from all the different hats I may have along my daily life.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. That is perfect for the starting point. And I think, Narayan, you could come, because in the alphabetic order, you are the next one.
Well, thanks. I appreciate for this invitation. We have a little bit tough time in Corona, so I'm sitting at home, and you can see my kitchen behind. So this is my office. But I am basically ecologist, and working in a jungle and forest, I come across a lot of tribal schools, and I am a part, and I have started one tribal school, and that is my journey getting into giftedness. 2002, I have conducted a intelligence test into my tribal school. I work with the different communities, but basically being an ecologist, I travel a lot across country. And I thought that, and I was thinking earlier that there are a lot of gifted kids roaming around in the streets and the forest area, and if we can identify them and do something for them, it will be good. But as you see, I'm not an academician, I'm not a psychologist, but probably you can call me an amateur person working in this field for the last 26 years. Thanks.
Thank you also very much. But as far as I know, you have a doctorate. So in which field did you get your doctorate?
I got my PhD in restoration ecology, and my second PhD is in Vedic ecology in Sanskrit. So
I see. So not only one, but two doctorates you have.
If you don't have a job, you can keep on doing education. So probably.
Yes, and high achievement in itself. And Ndondo, you can come. Please introduce yourself and your work in general.
My name is Ndondo Muli, and I am so privileged to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be here today, all the way from Kenya. And I am basically an administrator. My base is on administration and management. That is what I did. And in my undergraduate, I did community development, and I did also management, business management. So I've been involved in various cadres and various levels in policy making in our country, and also in various religious platforms, and being able to help out in decision making. Other than that, what I do for Muli Children's Family, that is where I work as an operations director, and therein I also did my master's and in human resource management and also strategic management. So that shifted me a lot in another platform or another space whereby we have organizations all over the country in Kenya that mainly basically deal with children issues in the country. It's called Area Advisory Council, all the way it goes to the National Advisory Council. So I work with these councils. I work very closely also with Christian organizations that need help in one way or another. So I'm very pleased to be here today and share my experience in this space. Thank you.
Yes, and we are also very happy to be with you. And just I tell some personal information that with Sheila we met in many places, in Hungary, in Peru, so in our countries as well. And with the others we met in conferences and different professional circumstances. So this is the way we know each other personally. And I think we could continue with you, Ndondo. And the next question, please introduce Kenya. Naturally, we all know something, this and those things about Kenya, but please introduce the population, introduce the sociological aspect, from sociological aspect, the population as well. Introduce, please, the education in general and gifted education in Kenya in general, not your program, but in general.
Okay, thank you so much. And I love my country. It is Kenya, and Kenya is actually located in East Africa. And we have the equator that just divides Kenya right in the middle. Kenya has very many different climate settings. And we have from very dry areas to very lush green areas. And Kenya is known for its beautiful national parks. We have all kinds of animals. We have the big 5 animals. So this is an invitation for all of you when Corona is all done, that you can always come to Kenya. Our general population, according to the census that were done in 2019, is that we have a population of about 47.5 million people. And out of all this, it's really diverse in terms of when you look at the social aspect or the economical aspect of Kenya. Unfortunately, we have almost 86% of all Kenyans live below $5.5 a day. So it is really a country that translates to about 39 or so Kenyans live in abject poverty. So you find that the poverty level in Kenya has caused a lot of problems, in that's why you have all these vulnerable groups that are present because of poverty levels. We have children, as you have mentioned, we have orphans, we have street children, teenage mothers, destitute. We have people living with disabilities, elderly people, people living with HIV and AIDS, you know, and all these things. And people also live, as I said, Kenya has a very diverse climate. And there are places whereby there is abject drought, there is continuous drought. And all these things end up making Kenya have a very high prevalence of poverty. And when it comes to the needs that are there, or what kind of poverty, what really drives people to this kind of poverty, or what is happening around there, you find that there are so many people who cannot access proper health care. And especially now with the COVID-19, our health sector has been really challenged to handle you know, the number of people who are sick. And as we speak right now, our ICUs are all, you know, overstretched. And you find that the healthcare system is one that has been worked on by our government, but you find that not so many people can afford, you know, healthcare. Not so many people are able to afford education, proper education. You find that there are children who are dropping out of school. So there are people who are illiterate. and you find natural calamities. There's drought. We had locusts. Right now in Kenya, we have a problem with locusts. And at the same time, there are areas that are suffering out of drought. And a few months before the corona came, we had floods. So these natural calamities are the ones partly are responsible in putting the big fraction of Kenyans into the poverty level that we have. When it comes to the social aspects, because of the frustrations, and when you look at the index and the rates that are there currently, because of 2020 corona, a lot of people lost their jobs. What did that translate to? Depression, alcoholism, abuse. Children have been, we've had the highest number of teenage pregnancies in Kenya ever before. Broken marriages, unemployment, all these things are causing our country, Kenya, to really be in a desperate condition. Now, when it comes to the gifted, the mode of education in Kenya, we have a very robust system, and we were talking before, we were saying the corona has really changed a lot of education systems. I guess it's all around the world, there's a demand. But however, Kenya's mainly focus is very academic, and it's called the 844 system. But we are grateful to our government that right now they have changed since 2017. There are people who are spearheading the new curriculum. It is called the competence-based curriculum. The competence-based curriculum is the one that is going to, we see there's a space, we see there's an opportunity for young people to develop their talents, for young people to develop giftedness, because that is the avenue. In the 844 system, before we didn't have that space whereby people can, or young people or children can develop their gifts. And therefore, at the moment, there is little that is going on, but there is a little effort. And you find that there are programs that are being currently developed to gear up or to help in the giftedness and the talent education development. And I will say that when it comes to some people, for example, there's a lady I know, she's called Molly Gao. She writes even for the giftedness and talent. And she is from the Ministry of Education. People like those ones, individual persons who are spearheading, who are working hard to ensure that there's a reality in that there is giftedness and there is talent development education that can be entrenched in our current programs. But as of now, only the very affluent schools have this setting that of encouraging children and young people to develop their skills and to develop their talents. Thank you very much.
Thank you also very much for this very comprehensive picture of your country population, education and gifted education. And Narayan, please introduce India in this sense. If it is possible to introduce India as a huge continental country.
Well, I want to just make a little bit more clarification that the main name of this nation is Bharat. And it is a Sanskrit word, and it says Bha means knowledge, and Rat means people who wander in knowledge. So this is a country of people who have vast knowledge. And I'm talking about 1.3 billion people, and Corona also has a big impact on us. But there are very positive sides of Corona, which we have seen in this last 1 year. A lot of volunteerism. My program of giftedness has received more donations than earlier years. So people have said, okay, you are doing good job, and education is a big thing, and people are investing and donating. If talking about India, we have more than 450 languages registered. There are more than 4,000 dialects. You know, India is a diverse country with all climatic zones and different types of forest. It's a more colorful country. 80% of the population is rural area, and somewhat you can say that they are in a poverty, below poverty and above poverty line. But last 10 years of good administration of Mr. Prime Minister, of current Prime Minister, a lot of things have been changed. A lot of money and economic infrastructure facilities have been at grassroots level. Unfortunately, the producer of this country is underprivileged, and the person who is consumer is a privilege. So we are trying to work on that dynamics where the farmer is become privileged and he gets more money so that he can lift his thing and the country will get a good thing. The kind of poverty, the reason is poverty is basically the political will. And we were, most of the countries like other countries, we were the politically colonized country. And I can tell you in 18th century, 36% of world GDP was from India. And now because we are the poorest, we became poorest because of colonial rules and other things. Talking about definition of development in India, there were two big approach. One was Mahatma Gandhi's approach, making village self-sustainable, which was one of the best approach one should take. But there was a Western influence on that time, the Prime Minister, and we adopted Western model of development, like industries and all those things. So the villages got separated from the main development program. What is the reason for poverty? It's basically not having a good share of natural resources, or there is no equality in sharing of the resources. That you can consider education, infrastructure, or other facilities also. There is unequal sharing, and that leads to the more of poverty things. Education system, still we follow colonial way of education system, where Britishers want us to be clerks and office bearers. So still India is in that condition where we are getting a good education, we are good in English speaking, we are good in maths, we are good in sciences, but we don't have entrepreneurs because we have not taught to be entrepreneur. We have to be servants. But this thing is changing, and we talk about gifted education program. For centuries to centuries, India has a lot of big gifted programs. In classical dance, classical music, you talk about folk songs and recipes, and that traditional system of gifted education was called Gurukula, where student is staying in teacher's home, do all the work, and he get lessons from the teacher. Still in India, in South India, you can see traditional Gurukula, where a master who is living in a poverty or low income, but having 10, 15 students at his home, and he teaches traditional knowledge. So India has a very good gifted program earlier. Talking about the regular gifted program in academic sense, after the independence, Indian government has really worked on giftedness program. We have best engineering and medical colleges and infrastructures, IITs and management schools. But this is for high elite people. And then government came up with a concept of reservations so that the underprivileged kids will get some seats into those education system, and they can have their development. But still, more or less, all these big academic institutions for gifted, science gifted or maths gifted or other gifted, they are for higher society. For underprivileged, this one, the giftedness program is not existing, and that is what I have started last 22 years. Because these entire underprivileged community is being treated as servants, helpers, laborers. So education is not a priority to them. And certainly the program which we have started, and now government has taken up in their own government schools, giftedness program, but still it is in maths and science. So it is more on performance based, not in what other participants said about skill set, on the basis of skill set. So this is the basic, we have some professional way giftedness programs running, but they are costly. The Cambridge University and Oxford University and a lot of international universities are coming with their own giftedness program in India. And you have like maths talent and science talents, but again, the cost and the ratio is very different. But it gives only opportunity for privileged community. So this is the basic scenario of India.
Yes, thank you very much. And we will talk about your own program and what is the difference with your program compared to the other Indian programs later. But at first, I call Shaila to talk about Peru and the situation in your country.
Thank you, Janos. I would like to share my screen, so I'm going to share a screen with you so that I think visually things help to be understood. Well, Peru is right here in South America, you know, and we are a country that has been enriched by different migration waves. This is important. Why? I know many countries have received different migration waves, but in Peru particularly, this situation has shaped also the country. So we have descendants from Western Europeans, also Eastern Europeans, African people, also from Japan and China mainly, I mean from Eastern countries. So also Peru has I would say, significant challenge in geography. We have the Amazon rainforest over here. We have the highlands of the Andean mountains here, and also we have a highly desertic coast, okay, close to the Pacific Ocean. If you see this configuration, geographical configuration related to the ethnic linguistic diversity from American natives, okay, because people that are descendants from migrants are mainly in the coastal area. But what's going on in the Andes and in the Amazon jungle used to have more than 80 different, not as many as India, of course, but 80 different native ethnic linguistic groups. And we have several of them also in the Andean mountains. If you compare this Peruvian ethnic linguistic map to the one related to population rates, you can see that this is a highly centralized country. Peruvian population is only 32.97 million inhabitants, from which 10.7 are in Lima. So you can understand how the country is configured, highly centralized. All the important decisions take place here in Lima, okay? And if you compare the areas where you don't have much population, the lower population is also related to the jungle areas, to the Amazon areas. And if we see the poverty or the monetary, because there are different types of poverty, right? The monetary poverty map, you can see that most of the poverty belt is related also to the Amazon jungle, with, of course, some areas, important areas, in the Andean mountains, in the Andean highlands. So this comparison, this comparative maps give you some idea about, for instance, the poverty rates in the Amazon rainforest, that it's up to 25.8%. In the Andean highlands, it's about 29.3%, and in the desertic coast, 13.8%. We have improved, if we can say that, in terms of the evolution of the total monetary poverty index. Until 2018, I would say 2019, of course, before Corona, right? Because nowadays the situation is pretty difficult. So this poverty and extreme poverty conditions have also shaped the society, the Peruvian society. First of all, we have many challenges. We have the climate challenge that Ndongo has already mentioned in terms of floodings. We have terrible floodings, and we're never enough prepared for them. Okay, and these floodings, you know, they have a significant impact, not just for the country in economical terms, but of course for educational terms for the children, because they tend to lose school, they lose classes. And also we have a desertic area in which you don't have crops, right? So then you have hunger in those areas as well. So climate change is a reality in Peru. We are losing water. Our highlands in the Andes are losing snow. They used to be white mountains, and now they are black or brown mountains. So no snow anymore, and this is significant affecting also the water that comes towards the coast. So the coast is becoming much more desertic than before. And the water and food provisions, what I was talking about, are highly related to the climate change challenges. Our demographic tendencies are already going up. I mean, the situation is worsened. And here, the problem is also with the religious beliefs and the religious extremist groups, because of course, science and scientific and academy wants to include policies that would somehow control some demographic tendencies, but then there are also religious perspectives, and here the church is very important and has a lot of power in terms of political terms. So there is an ongoing conflict depending on who is in the political power at that time. We have transnational crimes. You know, we're the #1 country producing coca. So this is a big issue because children, youth that cannot find their way through education can easily, or think they can easily find their way through transnational crimes. And this is a very terrible situation, because if you make a study in terms of vocational orientation, many of students from, let's say, 7th, 8th graders, or even 4th or 5th grade, when you ask them, what would you like to become when you're an adult, they would tell you a sicario. Can you imagine that sicario is not a drug dealer, is the person who is giving protection to drug dealers. Okay, the one that wears the guns and are protecting them. And everybody tells you, yeah, they earn a lot of money, so why not? So there is a crisis in terms of moral and values, because that's the reality, and the context can shape also the children if they don't have a proper, way or space in their school. So education is the only thing that could really save the children. Also, we have poverty and, of course, external debt, right? I'm not going to repeat all the challenges and all the factors related to monetary poverty and also gender issues. Okay, as Nando has already mentioned, and also Narayan. So I don't want to repeat what you have already said, but definitely we are a highly fragmented country, socially, economically, geographically. And this is also affecting significantly communication among the population, national identity, health and well-being, violence rates. We're I think the second country with domestic violence in the studies of UNESCO. And this is very dramatic for us. So we're doing some things about this. And in gender studies, there is already a lot of things to do. So we're not particularly in well position. Well, I just wanted to show you how education is in Peru. As I've mentioned, we have around 32 million, or well, going to 33 million of population. Compulsory education is along 11 years that started in kindergarten in the preschool year. Kindergarten is compulsory, goes through primary education up to 11th grade of secondary education. We have only 11th grades in the regular school curriculum, in regular schooling. And the academic years goes from March to December. We have a system from 0 to 20 that is our grading system, and we have easily comparative, comparisons to international and US also grading systems. In terms of our general stream, we have now there is an education law that wants to put also compulsory from 3-year-old program, but that's already under discussion. Why? Because we know the importance of preschool years. And if the children are, if compulsory education starts in 5 years, then you have 2-3 years that have been lost because they don't receive any other support. So it is important to include preschool years as a whole in compulsory education. And then secondary education, they can be related to formal secondary education or technical school. Sometimes particularly poor children or children living in rural areas, after primary education, they start the basic level of technical school because they can think, I'm not going to go up to secondary education looking for a college degree because I cannot afford it, or they see it as a very, very far away goal, okay, and reachable goal, really. So they choose to go to basic technical school. If some of them, they step down to regular secondary education and go to the middle level of technical school. So this is also another option for secondary education. And post-secondary, we have college level or post-secondary technical institutes as well. So this is more or less how education in Peru is shaped. In terms of the services we have for the highly able, there was a whole issue going on, but I can tell this is one of my goals that I really got to achieve, which is the formation of the cores, which are academies for arts and sciences, for the highly able coming from extreme poverty conditions. They were initially thought for extreme poverty conditions, then they changed to poverty conditions because we have 20% of our population is under poverty conditions and 2-3% now is under extreme poverty. So instead of entering in this discussion about who is poor, who is more poor, etc., we chose to focus this on this 20% of the poverty condition. And they started the first one in Lima in 2010 after different presidents, different governments. Now we have 25 cores, one per region. Every region has a core. And we have developed an interesting system for identifying them and, of course, considering all what János has already talked about in terms of the conditions in which children, usually poor children, are rising up, right? So these are some pictures of the core, and I think I'll stay just here. Yes, I don't want to go ahead.
Yes,
because later I'm going to tell you about how the system is for them. Okay.
Yes, because now we can turn to your own systems, which is running extreme danger and poverty. I think now we could start with Narayan and India. I think your program is really internationally very unique. So please introduce your program. Who are the children in your program, what age they are in, what kind of identification method you have, and what do you use as a method for their gifted development?
Well, my program name is tribal Mensa nurturing program because it started in my tribal school in year 2002. I've conducted a Mensa test because being a Mensan identified in 1978, I was being identified and nurtured in first India's gifted school, that is Jnana Prabodhini, which is in Pune city. And in year 2002, I started conducting a Mensa test in my tribal school, and I was able to find 4 girls who became Mensans, scoring more than 98 percentile score. So basically, I use a figural non-verbal test, which is recognized by Mensa. And in last 10 years, I was using that. And recently, we have come up with our own indigenous test, still based on its non-verbal figural test. So in year 2002, I identified 4 girls, and that has increased in 2007 to 64. And in 2020, more than 40,000 students I have screened across country, and I got more than 3,500 students who are gifted. So Tribal Mensa Nurturing Program is a special program. So what we do is we go to the school and we conduct a Mensa test, and we screen the entire school. We do screening at the age of 8th grade. That is when the kid is in 11th or 12th of his age. And the kids who scored more than 95 percentile score in Mensa test, we screen them as gifted. And then we conduct pull-out program for those students. So in a school of a population of 500, 600 students, we get somewhat 30, 35 students as gifted. And I'm talking about 600 students in one grade. So there are 5, 6 classrooms. Each classroom has more than 70 to 80 students. And then we screen the entire population and we get those many students. In 9th standard, we do a nurturing program. And this is what the typical Tribal Mensa highlight is. We have developed an indigenous nurturing program based on Sanskrit ancient knowledge literature. So we have come up with different activities, and we conduct 12 workshops year round in 9th grade. And then in 10th grade, when the kid comes, he has to sit for a very competitive state level examination. And so they are busy preparing that. During that time, Tribal Mensa Nurturing Program conducts study skill workshops. So mostly the gifted kids are afraid of performance. They are not able to perform in academic career. And that is what I have seen in my last 25 years of career in giftedness, that you can call a person as gifted, but his academic performance is not to the standard, basically in underprivileged. Because as he is gifted, he is emotionally weak and other problems he has in family. So that reflects into his academic performance. So what we do is we give study skill workshops in his 10th grade. And then we give career counseling, one-to-one counseling, psychological counseling, as well as career counseling to the gifted kid. And they said, okay, you are gifted, you have been nurtured, and this is the career which you can choose and you can be successful. So this is what basically the Tribal Nurturing Program we conduct. More on that, we have developed a lot of material in this gifted nurturing program. So we are not focusing on academic nurturing. The total program is non-academic. So we focus more on skill sets rather than is he good in mathematics or is he good in science. We don't bother about that. He can perform in his science and maths. That is immaterial to us. But is he able to do more observations? Is he able to raise more questions? Like, for example, our nurturing programs has like, we give a small leaf and ask them to make observations. And this tribal and underprivileged gifted kids do more than 500 observation of that leaf. So that is the skill set what they have. And then we show them, okay, this is what your brain is working. This is what the gift you have. So can you use that observation skill or questioning skill to your profession or your career, and then you can grow in this one. So these are 12 workshops we have spread out into this. More than 123 psychological parameters, attributes we take care of in this nurturing program. Mostly the nurturing program are in the school campus, and that is what we have restrictions. We don't have a typical infrastructure where we bring them into one place and do the. So we go to the school and we do those programs. Last 3 years, we are focusing more on girls, and we have more exclusive program for girls called VAMA. VAMA is a Sanskrit name for girls. We believe that if girls can get educated, she will help two families. One is mother's family and as well as the husband's family. So with one investment, you get two things, one to one free. So that is why, and we have seen for last 5 to 8 years, the sincerity in the girls being to prove themselves as gifted and prove them that they are doing good is more than the boys. I think what other countries, same experience we have, most of the kids are going for quick money. So very shady work they want to go for that, and a lot of things, bad things they get into. So that is what the nurturing program Tribal Mensa is doing for last 25 years. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And this is really a very, very valuable program. I know the program in some more details as well. Maybe later we can go into those details as well. But now I would like to ask you, Ndondo, can we say that the program in which you are is a kind of family program for these children, or this is something different, just started by a family?
Okay, thank you, Yana, and for the opportunity. I'm very excited when I talk about Muli Children's Family, and if it's okay, I will share just a bit on my screen, just to explain. And as, sorry, I have so many things happening. I'm not very good at this, but yeah. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Well, the Muli Children's Family is in Kenya, as I said, and then it was founded in 1989 by
Excuse me,
Charles
sorry,
Muli.
Steph, just for a minute. Is it possible to put it full screen, please?
Did we lose her voice, or?
Sorry?
Sorry, I had the impression that we lost your voice. And can you put the slides on slideshow mode, because then it is bigger, the slide.
Oh.
Yes, because then it is easier
There
to.
you go.
Oh, now it is perfect. Okay.
And then I don't have power.
Oh, I see. Yes, it can happen, unfortunately. But do you think that we could continue with Shayla and then come back to you, or how quickly this?
Yes, because I have power breakout. I don't have, I have a power, what is it called?
I see.
Blackout right now.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. It also shows in itself how difficult circumstances sometimes you work. But Shayla, then we can turn to Peru, and we will come back to the Kenya program, which is a very interesting program. So what can we learn from you about the program in Peru for this special population?
But yeah, I would say that as a researcher also, because I have, as I've told at the beginning, different hats, a practitioner and also researcher, our studies on gifted children in the Andean and Amazon region had led us to consider giftedness as a social construct. and highly dependent on cultural and developmental factors, as well as on educational opportunities, of course. As we have just seen what happened to Dondo, imagine if we were in a school, right? Suddenly electricity went out, so those children are not having the same opportunities from schools that might have an electrical generator, for instance, right? As Narayan was saying, in terms of the differences that we have in our countries, in terms of those who are attending more affluent schools, right, or come from affluent families, so they have enriched opportunities comparing to others. So we need to restrain our need to frame a narrow one-size-fits-all conception of giftedness towards a dynamic one shaped by the values and concepts and attitudes and the language of the culture. In multicultural contexts where poverty conditions are inherent to native populations, as happens in my country, students who perceive greater obstacles during acculturation are much more sensitive to social exclusion, and we have seen that. So challenging experiences in acculturation may lead to heightened reactivity also to socially hurtful events. So this is now the way we are approaching to gifted education is not considering like, okay, let's have an institute and let all children come to our institute, but because they would also demand us a significant budget. So what we do is work with what we have, which means Ministry of Education, so that we can reach a broadened spectrum of children as well. And in this sense, I would like to share my screen in order to tell you what we have found that works. So first of all, advocacy strategies. And for advocacy strategies, we have, we are working, yes, with the Ministry of Education, but also with the public schools, particularly with those schools that are recognized as having very good practices in terms of pedagogical. Also with our network, we have Templeton Community, Narayan. I met Narayan as a Templeton Fellow it's going to be 11 years ago. ECHA is a very good network space as well, ETSN, World Council, etc. So we also are very related to the colleagues in our network in order to help us sometimes with information, sometimes with some advice, etc., or with interchange as well, because belonging to a university or academic settings also allow you to have interchange for research purposes. Also, as an Eisenhower Fellow, I can reach private foundations that can also give us, and of course, doing advocacy work with them. Whatever, you never know when there is an opportunity in order to support whatever you want to do. So we're having this kind of umbrella of different activities in advocacy terms, and also, of course, mentoring practices and peer mentoring, which we are launching at my university as well. Because at least in Peru, we feel that gifted students should be sensitive towards cultural differences, culturally diverse. They have to know and to develop these skills in order to work in collaborative groups, culturally diverse. Also, they need to be to have adaptation skills towards cultural differences and be sensitive to justice and equity issues. Equity issues are particularly significant in relation to giftedness. For instance, since last year, we're dealing with the budget of the Ministry of Education that was initially related to this course, that now they want to change it to rural schools. I mean, we cannot discuss or go into this discussion that rural schools do not need the budget. Of course they need it. But why taking away the budget of a program that is functioning very good with demagogical terms and not really with evidence? We have evidence from the course. And if you speak up to the general population and you tell, oh, we need that money to be placed in rural schools, of course rural schools need. But you need also a program, a project that a sustainable project that really shows that this is going to work. Otherwise, what is happening dramatically in our countries is when somebody takes the budget from one program, it never goes back, right? And never reaches where they want to put it anyway, because rural, as you have seen, is really challenging. And we followed Ford and Wheaton standards of cultural competence as well. Indeed, at the course, they follow these standards in order to organize their well-being programs inside the course. Okay, so these are the standards they follow. Also, in terms of research, another thing that works for us is research and training. We have a very significant exchange program with the Netherlands, and our students go to the Netherlands and their students come to us, and they're really helpful because they support us with the peer mentoring. In our intervention programs, we are participating in the identification of the 8th graders attending the core schools. Core schools are 9, 10, and 11th grade. So why are we so focused on cultural sensitiveness? Because you can imagine how it is to place 8th grade, 9th grader, because they are starting 9th grade, from all different ethnias, coming from different backgrounds in a boarding school. They have to live together and do the daily activities. Coming from very, very different backgrounds, it is very challenging. Okay, so this is why 9th grade is not just the grade in which it's kind of a transition from the regular public schools they were accustomed to attend toward the core schools, but also in terms of think about yourself, some cognitive reflections as well, in order to develop them skills to adapt among themselves with respect on the others' cultures and values as well. So in our identification program, there are around 32,000 8th graders that each year they want to be part of the core, but there is just 2,700 spaces for them all around the 25 cores in the country. So there are some things that need to be considered and given like a bonus point, which are economic poverty, monetary economic poverty, learning needs, ethnic linguistic background. Yes, Native population gets a bonus point on this process. Those populations coming from a reparation from armed conflict, and also disabled conditions that could be motor, visual, or auditory disabled conditions. So all these students that have one or more, right, of these conditions get bonus points in the whole identification process. I have, this is already documented in a just brand new chapter in Conceptions of Giftedness and Talent that was released January this year. And also we have with the private foundation, this is a bank foundation that are supporting the Young Scholars Program from the course, students finishing course and going to college, private colleges. Otherwise, they would not be able to attend, good quality of colleges. So we have the financing part that they provide the scholarships or the loans, it depends. Also, we have the talent developing program through tutoring and mentoring. And also we support them, we monitor them in order to help with the job placement process. Because what we have found is that it's not just that you enrich the children and give them educational opportunities, because finishing school, if they don't have the opportunity to attend college level, then they get lost. I mean, all whatever enrichment you have given them, they, particularly if they come from poverty context, they don't have the means and they don't have the connections in order to find loans or find grants. You need to help them. This is why we're supporting that's a national program for grants and loans for these students. And also when they finish college, they need some, particularly in my country, I don't know how other countries, but here, as they see you, they treat you, right? And these children or these young scholars or university students do not have the money to spend in expensive dresses and expensive clothing. And sometimes when you need to attend a job interview, as particularly in certain areas, as you look, they treat you as you look. So what we do at the university setting is also giving them a sort of workshop and training in order for them to have the skills to fulfill the requirements of the job interviews. And we have been quite successful in this, really. So we have now students, some of them continue their studies abroad in the best universities in the world. And that's a lot to say from children coming from, highly disadvantaged conditions. So, and this is one of them, Madai. She entered MIT, Princeton, Berkeley, Columbia, Cornell, and Harvard to continue her master and PhD studies. So now she's a Harvard student because Harvard was the university that provided them her, a full, a complete grant. So, and the other activity that is important for us is teacher training. Empowering teacher training is important. We have to look and focus on their teacher training since the beginning, since they're undergraduate, and also including some metacognitive and thinking skills under training as well. Okay, oh, sorry.
Yes.
So I think I have said a lot, but now I can
Yes, but
stop.
we have seen all the slides, Shaila, and thank you very much for the explanation and congratulations for example, this student of you, really amazing achievement. And Ndondo, can we say that your program in which you are involved is a family program, or this is just a program which started with a family, your family actually? So what can we learn about your program in Kenya?
Wow, thank you, Yana. And I'm happy I'm back. The lights are back. So sometimes when you get the blackout, once in a while we get them. So we are kind of used to it.
I see.
But we are grateful for the opportunity. As you have asked, I will share my screen. I'll attempt to share my screen, and then we can go on from there. Yes. Okay. Muli Children's Family is we say we are the biggest family in the world because we are currently we have over 4,000 children who are under our care in almost 7 different locations. And on top of that, we have had over 20,000 young people who have graduated in the last 30 years from Muli Children's Family and being successfully integrated into the communities. It was started by Dr. Charles Muli and his wife, Esther Muli, who are very successful businessmen. And so when Dad was he's actually my father. I work for my parents, and it's such a privilege to do that. It started in 1989, and that is Dr. Muli and Mami Esther, mother and father to over 4,000 children currently in MCF. And when Dr. Muli was young, when he was 7 years old, he was abandoned by his parents. So he lived a life of abject poverty and abuse. He didn't have the opportunity to go to school, and he was a totally disadvantaged child. At 16 years old, he wanted to commit suicide and die. And that is when he got somebody who preached to him. He got salvation. He became a Christian, and from there his life changed. He started doing small jobs. He walked all the way to Nairobi about for 3 days. He was walking to get a job in the big city. He got a job and he was blessed to get a job, and later on he became actually one of the millionaires back in the 80s, back in the early 90s. You know, he was a millionaire, he was a businessman. And when he saw street children, when he saw child mothers, when he saw children who were neglected, disadvantaged children, he remembered his life, he remembered himself, where he was, and therefore he got a calling from God, and he stopped working. He sold all his businesses and actually started bringing street children into his home. He started bringing, the first ones were 3, and now we have over 20,000 who have gone through the program, and currently 4,000. So that is the reason why Muli Children's Family became, and why it's not, we don't call ourselves a home, because we live as a family. And there is a movie called the Muli Movie. You can see it in the mulimovie.com. It is actually for free. It will tell you all about Muli Children's Family, how it began, and where we are at right now. What is our main objective, or what drives us? Our main objective or our main vision is actually to see children and young people who are marginalized in the society, in the community, living a dignified life. So it really translates from Dr. Muli's own life, where he was so disadvantaged, and he worked so hard and got himself into education, and he got himself into business, and he succeeded. And that is what he believes, that when you give anybody, it doesn't matter where they come from, if you give them a platform, a good environment, if you give them good mentors, good people around them, those people, no matter if they are children or adults, they'll be able to get that giftedness. That talent will naturally come out. And therefore, we rescue these children, impact them, give them all the talents that, help them discover their talents, their gifts, and then we reintegrate them back into the community. Who do we work with? The children that we work with in MCF, they are mainly street children, orphaned children, child mothers, destitute, children with disabilities, all the children who are disadvantaged. And right now we have about 4% of our children who we take care of are actually positive, and they live full lives. We do not discriminate. We give them healthy lives. We give them medical help and all that. So how I told you about the poverty levels in Kenya are quite alarming. And those are some of the slums in Kenya whereby there's no sanitary sanitation, there's no clean water. That is a family house right there of this family there. And these 3 children are currently in Muli Children's Family, whereby we provide also for the family. We go back to the community, because you can't just take a child. You have to be mindful of the parents, so that we stop the children going to the streets, becoming beggars. Like Dr. Muli, he was a beggar. He was a street child for many years. When he was abandoned at 7 years old by his parents, he became a street child for all those years until he became 16 years old, and then he went and got a job. So we work with all these manner of children who live in the garbage bins and garbage dumps. I'm sure you're very well familiar with such scenarios. Then we had spoken about why they get to the streets. And then when they come to MCF, how do we nurture their talent? Remember, for anybody to be able to function properly first, you have to be well in their mind, health-wise. We bring them, we have a dispensary in all our premises. So we make sure that they are healthy. We make sure that we have doctors, nurses, because how do you even have a child not disturbed? How do you nurture a gift, a talent? How do you bring it out if a child is sick, if a child is psychologically not well? So that is what we give them. One of the reasons why we teach the young girls confidence, self-confidence, and we give them sanitary pads, of which I'm sure this is very common in very many areas, whereby if you have to have the wellness of the person, the children that we deal with, first of all is that we provide sanitary pads for all the girls. This may look like just a normal thing, but in most poor of the poorest, they can't access that. And what happens? They go into prostitution so that they can earn money to buy sanitary pads. And in the process, they get sick, they get children, and the cycle keeps going on. We not only work with Muli Children's Family in the giftedness and the talent development, we work with various community schools. Right now, we have over 40 schools that are under Muli Children's Family, whereby whatever we have learned, giving them spaces for them to know who they are, because if a child or a young person has to discover anything that is inside them, they have to discover who they are first. They have to be mentally stable. You have to teach them the good morals. We teach them all manner of things that teenagers do face. So we work with community schools. We work with them. They come also. We have our clinics are open for even the community, because the children, remember, the well-being of the children in MCF, the ones that you have picked from the streets or rescued them from difficulties, we have to mind also about their families, where they come from, some of them. And that is why we offer health services to the communities. We have volunteers who come, and I can tell you for sure, if we have to work and change this world, we need each other. We need different skill sets from everyone. And that is how we've been able to. And what we do is that, like this young girl here, she wants to be a nurse, and she wants actually to do medical courses. So when these international doctors come in Muli Children's Family, we link all the children in different aspects. If you want to be a doctor, well, come and do some internship, come and work. If you want to be a farmer, well, we have a farm, come and work there. So we have the communities who also come, and what we do is that we have open space for children to mentor each other, eat nutritious food, you know, laugh, and at the same time, we have them making programs or joking or creating dramas for one another. And they play, you know, you have to have a safe haven for these children. Now, when it comes to talent development or identification, you find that there are those ones who are very good in mathematics, you know, sciences, academic-wise. So we actually encourage them. Those ones who are so good, and we know these ones will definitely be an architecture. This one is very good in math. This one is very good in physics. So what do? We nurture them. We have all our schools, very good trained teachers. And the interesting thing is that once every child finishes grade 12, they become their peer mentors. They also go and start teaching in the school. They become social workers. They help the younger persons. So there are those ones who have gone to school and gone through the system, and they have been able to discover their giftedness, their talents in different areas. while us, we also train them on skill sets. And all these things are open to them. Are you a good designer? Do you want to make, okay, fine, you can be a designer, fine. How about we go to the tailoring room and then you try and design a dress? And they make clothes for their younger brothers and sisters. So that really helps them discover their passion, because without a driven passion, then how do we get the skills and the gifts out? Others are very good in hairdressing. We encourage them to do their hair, to do each other's hair. And on top of that, we bring the Kenya system of education. We have trainings whereby they do exams and they pass and they get certificates. So those ones who are not very good in academic, wise, and they're good with their hands, we encourage them. Like that young man, he's artistic. He has such a creative mind in designing woodwork, in metalwork. So stone cutting or stone dressing, they graduate, as I said, and then we also give them certificates and help them start up, because there's that aspect of reintegrating them back into the community. When they come to Muli Children's Family at a very tender age, like the little boy that we saw earlier on, we always help them know that one day they will need to go back to the community. One day their families, if they have families, they will depend on them. And some others, it's amazing that they have opened children homes. They say, I want to be like Daddy Muli and Mommy Esther. So what are they doing? They are rescuing now street children and vulnerable children, and it is so amazing. It's just so amazing. When it comes to sports, when we encourage them, those ones who are good in acrobats, soccer, our soccer team, young people right now, are competing in the National Super League. That means they're only one step before they actually get into the Premier League of our country. So those ones, the young man you're seeing here, we rescued him when he was 7 years old. He's a total orphan, and he was in a children's prison or a children's juvenile. And right now, he's one of the highest scorer in the Muli MCF football club. We teach them karate. There's all those are children watching each other, cheering one another. Right now, we have 4 girls who have been selected or chosen to represent Kenya in the Olympics, in Tokyo Olympics. And you find that the ones who have gone before, they have become teachers. Some of them have become teachers in acrobats, teachers in music, teachers in karate, and they have their own clubs out there. So it's just amazing what is happening. Athletics. We have one young man who is joining the Kenya Olympic team in running. So soon enough we'll be cheering. And where did they discover all this? In Muli Children's Family. We give every child an opportunity to explore their talents, whichever area, because you never know. It's hard to know who is gifted in what. So we give them the opportunity to go as far as concerned, to give them, those ones are our choirs. We have over 10 choirs in MCF, because out of this, in the Kenyan industry, music industry, we have a lot of children from Muli Children's Family. Now they are all grown up and they are able to produce their own music. They have become influencers. Others are in the entertainment industry. Others have become news anchors. They have become doctors, engineers, and it's wonderful when you see them. We have, of course, sustainability projects and all that, but then for now I'll stop sharing, and then I quickly mention something else. Just one moment, please. And what we do is that we have agriculture. Agriculture, how does agriculture, you can ask agriculture, giftedness and talent, how does it come in? We have farms. And as I mentioned, one of the ways is bringing them into, we have mentors. So we have peer mentors, and we have actually teachers and pastors, and we have counselors who mentor these children into the different levels or different gifts that they may have. We have them some who are interested in agriculture, so they help out in supervising, in learning, and become farmers. Wonderful people with excellent ideas on farming. So we have that. We produce our own vegetables. You know, some are for export, some are for local consumption in our home. Why do we do this? Where do those two link in? Because once they see, children love seeing things. They love imitating things. Once you tell them things, it becomes real for them. So others have become cooks. They help in the kitchen. They help in the farms that we do. And then on climate change, we also encourage them to plant trees. We have a whole area of trees in our farmland. Like Dr. Narayan, he says his gift is in nature and in forest and everything. So we are encouraging them to discover, actually, you can be able to take care of our environment. And some of them have a passion in knowing about animals. Others want to know more about trees. So Dr. Muli, we work, as I said, we work with different schools in our region. We bring them together and teach them how to plant trees. And therefore, we have a forest that we've planted, and we've planted many, many millions of trees and encourage people all around the world. So not only are we encouraging, what happens is that if we don't encourage young people in taking care of the environment, if we only think maybe the gifts and the talents are only in academics or so, who is going to take care of our climate? Who is going to take care of our nature? Who is going to, so this is Muli Children's Family Yatta, the whole of that you're seeing. Those are man-made dams. We constructed them. So they are young people who also drive the machines. All our machinery is actually operated by our children, our former, you know, the ones who have graduated maybe from grade 12 and all that. So they're the ones who do all this work, and it creates an opportunity for them to get employment. So we are creating employment opportunities for our own children who have now become adults, at the same time teaching them their passion, because passion is also very important as you consider. We had spoken about this is the other area of the country. Turkana, we have our base there, and these are the challenges that have made us go into agriculture. Because one of the ways we've discovered of evoking that talent, evoking that giftedness out of a child or out of a person is showing them there is a need, helping them, provoking them to think, how do you solve a problem? And through that, we've seen actually, that is flooding, we've seen them coming up with ideas and a passion and discovering what their talents are. Remember, I spoke about locusts in Kenya, flooding in Kenya. which has been really a big challenge. And then the COVID-19, it's just amazing. And now we've been able to teach the children being philanthropic. When we are giving food to the communities because of the hunger, because of the drought, we give them also, we have the children, the older ones, come and distribute food to the communities. All these people are coming to Muli Children's Family to receive food from us. And those are some of the kids who come from the village, and we give them food to go and be able to prepare. So food distribution in the different set of schools, we give them food to make sure that we don't only want to benefit in Muli Children's Family alone, but what about the surrounding area? What about the surrounding schools? So that they continue, as I said, we have a mentorship program. We not only help them discover their talents, discover all that, but we also give them food to ensure that they stay in school and they learn. Water is important. You cannot affect a community properly if you're not providing clean water, if you're not providing education for them. That is all water, giving water. And then coronavirus, you know, it's been a challenge for each and every one of us. So we distribute not only for our children, but also now, these ones were made by our own children. They made masks and we distributed to the communities, we distributed everywhere. And somebody has earned a living out of that. So the ones who wanted to be designers, not only are they designing, you know, what are they called? Masks, but they're also earning a living. So yes, I'll stop there for now. And thank you very much.
And thank you also, and congratulations for all these things. We really learned a lot. How you can make your program for this special population fit to your own country or own society, own natural environment as well, and also how you grow social responsibility and many other important things, not just cognitive development. We remained a very short time. So what we can do that I ask all of you to give some advices for those people who deal with similar population in their countries, children in extreme, gifted children in extreme danger and poverty. So Narayan, what would you suggest to your colleagues who live and work abroad with this population? What did you learn from your own program?
The first and foremost learning which I have is not to base everything on academic performance. So if we can develop something non-academic, so then more gifted people, students can enjoy that. The second thing which is very important, that if you come up with your own indigenous model, it's always academician and educationist people try to bring other model, try to adapt and modify. But you are fit and you are capable of developing your own model. I'm certainly in good terms with other models to learn from their models, but one has to come with an indigenous model because the kids will be more culturally and socially attached with what we are teaching, you know. For example, in tribal Mensa, most of the girls and boys, gifted kids, that our concentration is not happening when we are doing some schooling and other things. And in indigenous, in Sanskrit, old literature, how to concentrate mind, there are some stanzas. And I said, okay, if you chant these stanzas every day, early morning, 108 times, your concentration will increase. And we have scientifically proven how the kids can improve its concentration. So rather than talking something more philosophical and more scientific, if you have come with a small ritualistic cultural based activities, it always helps a gifted kid. It is one.
Thank you very much. And Shaila, the same question to you.
Well, as living in Latin American country and having the need to adapt and readapt to different circumstances, I would say find your voice to speak up and never give up. Okay, I think this is a good summary of I would tell anybody who would like to go ahead and give the dedication, because this is challenging, but it's up to you to give up or not, or go ahead. Yes.
Yes, very challenging. And thank you for your advices. And Ndondo, the same question to you. So your suggestions to colleagues who work with similar population in their own countries.
I will tell them not to give up and to seek to give when it's possible, to give as many opportunities as possible for the children or young people, then they can choose. And you see, it's very interesting that Dr. Rampel from IUBS, Dr. David Rampel from IUBS, he did a research in Muli Children's Family. He's written something. And one of the things that he mentioned is that actually you need mentors for the children to be able to succeed. We need people who go forward and help the children become confident. And these young people, when they are in that platform of decision making, when they flourish, they are the ones who are going to come up with the best education system. They're going to come up with the best products for even giftedness and talent development. It's like finding, you have to get that diamond in the rough. You have to look for it. So these are our diamonds. These disadvantaged children, disadvantaged persons are our diamonds. We need to find them, give them an opportunity for them to be able to flourish, and they'll give us the best way forward. So thank you very much.
We also thank you. And I think you all do a beautiful and very valuable work in your country, in your program. But for these children, this is more than something beautiful, because this is about these gifted children's lives. You give lives for them. So on behalf of these children, I also want to thank you to take part in this roundtable discussion. Thank you very much and good luck in the future.
Thank you, Janos.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janos.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Nando. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it will be a nice and interesting program in this conference. And thank you for coming. And I really enjoyed. Technically, it was really very good and very useful. The slides were very meaningful. So thank you for all your preparation. And we have learned a lot of interesting things about gifted education for this special population with children in extreme poverty and needs from India, from Kenya, and from Peru. So thank you really very much.
It is my great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Professor Frank Worrell. Professor Worrell is a professor of psychology in the Graduate School of Education at the University of California, Berkeley, where he serves as faculty director of the school psychology program, the Academic Talent Development Program, and the California College Preparatory Academy. His areas of expertise include academic talent development, at-risk youth, cultural identities, teacher effectiveness, and the translation of psychological research findings into school-based practice. In his research, he examines the role of psychosocial constructs as risk and protective factors in relation to students' educational and psychological functioning. Professor Worrell is the author of more than 200 articles, book chapters, and book publications, including The Psychology of High Performance, Developing Human Potential into Domain-Specific Talent, which was co-edited with Rina Subotnik and Paula Olszewski-Kubelius, and which was the winner of the 2020 NAGC Scholar Book of the Year Award. Furthermore, Dr. Worrell is the 2021 president of the American Psychological Association, the APA. Today, he will speak about diversifying gifted and talented education, the so-called GATE programs. Thank you, Frank, for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Good day, everyone. I would first like to express my thanks to ECHA for the invitation to present to you today. I also want to say that my thoughts are with all of you who have been negatively affected by the ongoing pandemic, COVID-19, the reason why this presentation is virtual and not live. In addition to the health and well-being concerns that the pandemic has raised, COVID-19 has also highlighted ongoing racial and ethnic disparities in income, education, and many other aspects of life, issues that are related to the topic of my talk today. My title today is Diversifying Gifted and Talented Education, an Uphill Battle for the Field. I'm going to go through this in several parts. I'll first begin with a discussion of the status quo, disproportionality or underrepresentation in gifted education, and then briefly highlight common reasons given for disproportionality. But before diving into those reasons, I'm going to then pivot and talk about our definition of giftedness, because how we define giftedness, how we identify students that we classify as gifted, this identification process has implications for how we interpret disproportionality. Next, I'll talk about the evidence base for the common reasons, and then I will say what I think the reason is for disproportionality and why it's an uphill battle. And then I will conclude with some suggestions for things that we can do as we move forward. So disproportionality in gifted education can be defined as follows, right? That the percentage of certain groups in gifted education programs, for instance, African Americans and Latinx, are substantially lower than their percentages in the school population. Concomitantly, the percentages of certain groups is substantially higher than their percentage in the school population. That's basically the idea of underrepresentation. And let me actually take a moment here to apologize for using US data. I'm based in the US, but I would like to suggest that many of the issues that you are facing in your countries, I think the comments are going to apply. So let's take a look at this. So if we take a look at the school population versus the population of students in gifted and talented education, we can see that African Americans are underrepresented, Hispanic Americans are underrepresented, and that Asian Americans are overrepresented, European Americans are overrepresented. The other groups are very much, I mean, Native Americans are a little bit underrepresented, but their numbers are incredibly small. Underrepresentation is also present in higher education and especially at selective schools. And this is important to note because I think sometimes when we think gifted education, we think K-12. But if we are thinking gifted education as outstanding performance, strong academic performance, or performance in other fields, this should not be as surprising. So here's the US population. In 2017, as you can see, 54% of the US population was white, 14% Black, 22% Hispanic, 6% Asian, 1% two or more races. And now let's look at the Ivy League. So you may have heard of this. This is a group of selective universities that have a long history. They're considered very selective and so forth. And remember that 54% of the population was white. When we look at the Ivy League, we recognize actually that in many cases, the population of white students is actually comparable to their population in the percentage, like 52% at Brown, or they're underrepresented, 40% at Columbia. So at Dartmouth, they're 56%, but in every other case of the Ivy League, the whites are not overrepresented. When we look at African Americans, on the other hand, remember that they are 14% of the population. We see that they are substantially underrepresented, 4%, 9%, 8%, and so forth in these selective institutions. And similarly for Hispanics, who are 22% of the population, but they are underrepresented, 13%, 18%, 10%, and so forth. Some other selective private universities, we see a similar pattern. The African Americans are underrepresented. They are way below that 14% threshold, although there are regional differences. For instance, there are 11% at Duke University in the South, but they are substantially underrepresented in other places. European Americans, again, are underrepresented, slightly underrepresented in many places, but there are a couple of places that are overrepresented. Georgetown, for instance, in Washington, D.C., they're overrepresented. Asian Americans are overrepresented everywhere. So they are 6% of the population, but as you can see, Asian Americans, 50% Asian, 24% Asian, and so forth. And I'd forgotten to talk about Asian Americans in the previous slide. They're also overrepresented in the Ivy League, 24%, 17%, 24%, and so forth. And so we have this pattern, right, at least in higher education, which is, if we are talking about that as the top end of gifted education, where Asian Americans are overrepresented, African Americans and Latinx populations are underrepresented. My state, California, I'm at the University of California, Berkeley. Here are the statistics for California as a state. And I'm pulling this out not only because I'm here, but California is a large state. For example, our population is somewhere in the order of, I think, 40 million people, are larger than many, many countries. I think the 5th largest economy in the world. As you can see, the largest ethnic group in California now is Hispanic. So 39% of the state is Hispanic, 37% is white, 15% is Asian, 6% Black, 3% multiracial, 1% American Indian Pacific Islander. And how do the University of California, our flagship system, hold up when we look at underrepresentation versus overrepresentation? Again, when we look at, let's start with European Americans. European Americans are actually underrepresented at practically every campus. 30% white, 29% white. So they're 33% white here, right? And they are 37% of the state. Asian Americans are 39% of the state. So not Asian, sorry. Hispanic Americans at 39% of the state are also substantially underrepresented. 15%, 25%, 36%. So you see Irvine. Note the pattern that the more selective the campus, the greater the underrepresentation. So you see Berkeley, you see Davis, UCLA, you see San Diego, which are the more selective campuses, have greater underrepresentations of Latinx populations. When we look at Asian Americans, who are 15% of the state, we see that they're substantially overrepresented. 46% at Berkeley, 36% UC Davis, at UCLA, 35%, at UC San Diego, 49%. So again, at the more selective campuses. UC Merced, the most recent campus and currently the least selective campus, actually has 58% Hispanic, in part because it's least selective, but also in part because it's in the Central Valley, where in fact the majority of the population is Hispanic. And so I think this is an important point to note. And then when you look at the current time, so this year, or actually last year, it's now 2021, We look at the population of California, 6% African Americans, admissions to California, UC Berkeley admits, all right, was 6%. Asian Americans, 15%, you can see there over 40% of the admits. European Americans, 37%, and Hispanic Americans, substantially underrepresented. So the question then is, why does this disproportionality, this underrepresentation, overrepresentation exist and persist? And so one of my colleagues, Donna Ford, has written extensively about this over the years. And in a new book that just came out earlier this year, she has a chapter with several colleagues, and she makes several points. She argues in that chapter that deficit thinking is the major reason GATE underrepresentation exists, persists, and is so pervasive. She points to biased teacher referrals. She points to microaggressions. She talks about prejudice in GATE identification and programming, and argues that, of course, that this underrepresentation is inequitable because it's unfair, unjust, and discriminatory. I agree. It's inequitable, it's unfair, it's unjust, and it's discriminatory, but I would say it's discriminatory at a societal level, not necessarily at an individual school level, and I'll speak to that more. But she also argues that this it's like deliberate. It can be easily fixed if only we have the will. And I would say that that's a simple, straightforward solution, but to my mind, it's incorrect. And I will spend much of my time today telling you why I think that's incorrect. It's not simple, it's not straightforward, and it's going to require lots of changes that are over a long period of time. As part of her belief that disproportionality is deliberate and easy to solve, she has created an equity formula which talks about giving a 20% allowance to districts to address underrepresentation. So for example, if African Americans represent 19% of a district, but are only 10% of the GATE program, African Americans are then 52% of the GATE program. 52% of African Americans are in the GATE program, and thus underrepresented by 48%. It's 28% more than the equity formula suggests, right? And so therefore that district should be penalized because they are actually below, they are, way below or above rather the target that they should have for underrepresentation. But this equity formula is based on an assumption. The assumption is that students in all groups have similar or identical levels of achievement. And if this were the case, this equity formula might make sense, but this assumption is blatantly inaccurate, right? And I think it's important to note, in the chapter, Ford and her colleagues go on to point out several other potential reasons for disproportionality. Minorities choosing not to participate because they're accused of acting white. She talks about racial identity attitudes. She pulls out Mickelson's work on abstract and concrete attitudes toward achievement. She talks about problems with the curriculum not being multicultural enough, right? And so if all of these things are reasons, then in fact, deficit thinking is not the only reason for disproportionality. Where Donna Ford and I would agree is that it's important to recruit and retain rather than just to identify. That's an important thing, I think, on which we agree. So let's move on and stuff. So I think that there are multiple factors for disproportionality, but there is one key explanation. That key explanation is not simplistic or simple. It requires changes in policy, and it requires time, in decades. And the solution to me begins with our definition of giftedness. And so for definitions, I'll turn to the State of the State in Gifted Education report that is put out in the US periodically. In state definitions of giftedness in the US, the most frequently mentioned aspects of giftedness were advanced intellectual ability, creativity or creative thinking, and specific academic ability. I will note that the adjective advanced here applies to intellectual ability, it applies to creativity, it applies to specific academic ability. Intellectual ability, how do we measure that? We measure that using test scores. So that's what we would be using. Creativity or creative thinking, there are several measures of those. Many of these are not highly correlated with achievement and are not really used in a major ways for identification in most schools. Many districts and schools do use academic ability, so they use achievement scores, reading, mathematics, science, and so forth. So we have this advanced intellectual ability. So if we think about giftedness, one can think of giftedness as superior performance. And so in addition to the definitions that the states use, we have several definitions that are common in the United States. There's the federal definition, so the US federal government's definition, which talks about superior performance in intellectual ability, academic achievement, creativity, leadership, the visual and the performing arts, right? We also have Gardner's 8 intelligences, again, being superior performance in use of words, numbers, spatial relationships, and so forth. There are people who argue about the genetic potential that individuals have. They argue gifted students are sort of different biologically. And the approach that I take, several of my colleagues and I take, is a talent development approach, where we are saying that in fact, giftedness is really an adult outcome that is based on the interactions among ability, appropriate curriculum, effective teaching, hard work, opportunities to translate potential into accomplishments, right? So it's a combination, an interaction of all of these factors, and that what we are doing with kids is working with potential. But I think we would all agree that gifted, if we're talking about giftedness, we are talking about superior performance relative to peers in a domain. So if we were to look at the standard bell curve, then we would argue that in fact students who are gifted are probably at this end of the distribution and not at the lower end of the distribution, right? So in the US, we have national tests to sort of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and students are grouped into 4 proficiency levels. The lowest level is below basic, then there's basic, then there's proficient, and then there's advanced. And the agreement is that in fact we really like all kids at the minimum level to be proficient. We'd like all kids to be proficient. Some of them will be advanced, but we'd like all of them to be proficient, right? And if we are to use these proficiency levels, from which level should students for GATE programs be selected? Below basic, basic, proficient, or advanced? I think we would all agree that it's most likely that students to be selected for GATE programs should be selected from the advanced group, definitely, and possibly from the proficient group, right? Because of course, these things are these are distributions of scores. It's not a single score. Unlikely from the basic or below basic. So now let's look at the percent of school GATE and advanced NAEP reading scores. So here we have, right? We have school, we have GATE, we have advanced NAEP reading and advanced math reading. And what do we see, right? We see, there we have it, that 17% of African Americans in schools, 8% in gifted and talented programs, 3% are scoring and advanced in reading, 2% are scoring and advanced in mathematics, right? Hispanic Americans, 25% of the population, 18% in GATE programs, 4% and 3% in advanced in reading and math. When we look at Asian Americans, we see a different role, right? 6% of the population of the US, 10% in gifted and talented education programs, but 22% of them are doing well advanced in reading and 29% are doing advanced in math, right? Now, when we look at European Americans, which is a group that's most represented in gifted and talented programs, we see that 12% are doing advanced in reading and 12% advanced in math. Now, remember that this 12% is 12% of this larger group of 52%. And there's going to be some overlap between these two 12%, but not every, there's some who are going to be advanced in math, some advanced in reading, some advanced in both and stuff. And this includes all of these. So on the basis of these scores, it is perhaps not surprising that we actually see the disproportionality that we see. In other words, let us assume, we know that there are things like discrimination exist, and I'm going to show poverty matters and these things matter. But if we were to put all of these things aside for a moment, let's put aside racism, let's put aside discrimination, on the basis of these scores alone, if we were selecting purely on the basis of academic achievement, we would expect to see Asian Americans and European Americans and students of 2 or more groups overrepresented in gifted and talented education programs, and students from other groups underrepresented in large part because of their lower scores. We would see, in fact, American Indian and Alaskan Natives overrepresented, but again, these 3% and 4% that are of 1% of the population. So as you can see, so a very small number. So with that as a backdrop, let's turn to the common explanations for underrepresentation. And I'm going to touch on 4 of them today: test bias, teacher bias, low socioeconomic status, and cultural variables. Starting with test bias. So the criticism of bias in testing is typically directed against tests of intelligence and other standardized tests, including tests of reading, mathematics, and so forth. But I think we often forget that bias is a technical term. Many people argue that the fact that, in fact, African Americans get lower scores on IQ, they get lower scores in reading and mathematics, that these mean differences in scores are an indication of test bias. But in fact, those of us in the measurement community know that that's not an indication of bias. It is a signal that you need to look at the scores, pay attention to see if they are biased, but means group differences in and of themselves are not indicative of bias, right? So, let's take a look at this. Consider these 3 groups of 10-year-olds, right? Group 1 comes from households with a swimming pool. So these may be households that have money, whatever, but they have a swimming pool in the backyard. Group 2 comes from households that live near a lake or a river, right? So Group 3 comes from households without swimming pools and that are also not near a lake or a river, right? Now I'm actually choosing people from these 3 groups to be on the swim team. So I'm putting them they come to school and I'm giving them a swimming test and stuff. Which group on average do you think will do least well on this test? Right? If we were in person, I'd wait for you to answer, but I'll have to provide the answers myself to my questions today. The group that will do least well on this test, on average, will be the group that comes from households without the swimming pool that are also not near a lake or a river, right? Does that mean that the swimming test is biased? The mean scores are going to be different. Group 1 and Group 2 will have higher mean scores on swimming than Group 3, right? It does not mean that the test is biased. It speaks to opportunity to learn, not to bias, right? Another example, I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. It's in the Southern Caribbean, 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. I think the lowest recorded temperature, to the best of my knowledge, was something like 66 degrees or something like that. So if we were to choose a random sample of, let's say, 15 to 25-year-olds from Trinidad and Tobago, and a random sample of 15 to 25-year-olds from Canada or Norway, let's say in Europe, from Norway, I'm willing to bet that and you would give them a test in skiing, not water skiing, but skiing on snow, I'm willing to bet that the sample from Norway will have higher mean scores than the sample from Trinidad and Tobago. At the same time, if we were to do it on water skiing, I'm willing to bet that the sample in Trinidad may have higher scores than the sample in Norway, right? Again, opportunity to learn, right? So, because at the heart of things, tests give us information about people's ability to do things, right? And so all that's, it's construct validity, and construct validity is made up of many parts. Reliability is one aspect of it, how consistent are scores, and do the consistency of the scores differ by group membership? In fact, so are the scores more reliable for one group than for another? Validity, so concurrent validity, other kinds of validity. Are the scores measuring what we want them to measure? And are they measuring the same construct in different groups, or are they measuring different constructs, right? All of these things are addressed using, a variety of statistical techniques, including one that's called differential item functioning, to look to see, are the scores that we are getting differing by males and females, Blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, and so forth. We look at those tests. And in fact, standardized achievement tests are all subject to these kinds of analyses because, as many of you may know, America is a very litigious society. We love to sue. If in point of fact, scores are in fact biased against a group and are being used to make decisions that are going to affect people's lives, you can be sued, and in fact, you would lose that lawsuit if it can be demonstrated that these tests are substantially biased and you have not done anything about that. So I'll run through briefly some data going back a number of years, going back about 2 decades, 3 decades, on, just pulling from different tests just to show some of these issues of bias. So let's start with internal consistent reliability. It's the most common one used. And so this is on the WISC-R. This was the second Wechsler test. Back in 1991, Kaufman did a study looking at the internal consistency reliability African Americans, European Americans, right? And what do we see? That in fact, the internal consistency is consistent across those 2 groups, right? Another type of reliability is called test-retest reliability or stability. Here's a 1999 study by Caneve and Watkins where they are looking at the stability of IQ. And they are, in this case, they're looking at 3 groups: African American, European American, Hispanic American. And as you can see, again, the scores are comparable across groups. Now, this one is a little lower than these others, but this, when you look at that, it's a 0.10 difference. These are not substantially different in the way we look at these things. Well, maybe one of the things that we know is that, in fact, 80% of school psychologists who do the testing and that kind of thing are white. And so it may be the case that students who are Black or Hispanic are not performing or not, are having differential performance. They're doing differential behaviors during the test when they're being assessed, right? And so this was looked at in this study, in a study in 1995, where they're looking at how are individuals from different groups behaving in terms of avoidance, inattentiveness, and being uncooperative, the things that could lower their score on the test, right? You can see the scores are pretty substantial for African Americans and whites, 0.97 to 0.99, Hispanics and whites, 0.96 to 0.98, high SES to middle SES. Fact, we get, in fact, a bigger discrepancy when we are actually looking at low SES, getting 0.91, 0.92, but still 0.9 is considered pretty high. And so all of them are within this 0.9 range, these coefficients of congruence, suggesting that the differences among groups are not substantial. Now, in this particular test, they looked at, so we've looked at congruence of behavior, we've looked at reliability. This one looked at structural validity, and structural validity is the test working the same way among groups? And again, so the CFI, you want that to be as close to 1 as possible. You want this to be close to 0. This is goodness of fit, this is misfit. So this is good fit, this is misfit. As you can see, the fit is 0.99 to 0.984. The misfit is 0.057 is the largest one to 0.035. Now, despite that, there was misfit. Some of the scores didn't. There are 2 subtests that did not work quite as well with things. Picture span and figure weights, right? Picture span and figure weights. But it's important to note that despite those tests not fitting quite well, we still got substantial fit, right? And to look at this, right? So when we look at figure span and so forth. So figure weights, here it is, contributes to fluid reasoning. But you'd note the verbal comprehension factor, that was fine. The visual spatial was fine. The major contributions to IQ scores were actually similar across Blacks and whites. And again, so another set of evidence that there's not substantial bias in the test. Now I'm showing this for this test. This is the WISC-3. I think we're now at the WISC-5. But these patterns that I'm reporting have been shown from the WISC going forward to the WISC-5 and on other tests of this type. When we look at IQ scores, these are IQ scores. So this is the normative sample for the WISC-3. The mean IQ, typically mean IQ on the Wechsler scales are 100. We see that the mean IQ is about 103 for the white normative sample. it's in the 90 to 88 range for the Black normative sample. This is a 15-point difference. Actually, that has reduced. I think it's now somewhere about 8 or 9 points, right? But this difference in mean scores, of course, has implications if we are using IQ to identify for gifted. And so that's very clear, right? But the difference is not based on discrimination or something like that. It's based on the scores that the students are getting. Now, important to note that the test is doing what it's supposed to do in some sense. This is a referral sample. And this referral sample, this is students who are doing less well in school. You'd expect them to have lower scores, and as you can see, they actually do have lower scores, as one would expect. But what does this 15 different points difference translate into in IQ? That's one standard deviation. So take this graph. So African Americans are the darker blue color, European Americans are the lighter blue color, the green is the overlap of the distributions. And of course, we know that these overlaps continue, right? So there are African Americans who are up here, there are European Americans who are down here. But when we are looking at the bulk of the distribution, we can see that there's substantial overlap here. Now, this is IQ of 130, right? Now, if I am in and this is population. If I'm in a school, right, the school is not going to necessarily be representative of the population. I am choosing individuals for gifted and talented program, and I'm using IQ and I'm using 130. Look at the difference between the scores, the group that I have to choose of people who are white versus the group that are Black. Now remember, European Americans are 54% of the population. Blacks are 14% of the population. So I am choosing from a substantial group here and a much smaller group here, much smaller percentage of a much smaller group. Again, this would lead to disproportionality without anything like discrimination and stuff existing, right? The use of IQ for gifted identification because of these differences in means will result in disproportionality. So, teacher bias. So, questions. Are there teachers who are biased? Again, I have to answer my own questions. I would say, of course, there are teachers who are biased. And in point of fact, those of us who are psychologists would argue that certainly in the context of the United States, but I would also argue in the context of every country, that everybody is biased. And so because we are conditioned, we are socialized in the country that we are raised in. And so to the extent that our country has biases, we are going to manifest those biases. So are there teachers who are biased? Yes. Are the majority of teachers biased? Yes, but does that bias translate into referring fewer students of color for gifted education, right? And is bias needed to explain teacher referrals? So I'll look at the third question, do teachers refer fewer students of color in a moment? Is bias needed to explain teacher referrals? As I've just shown with IQ, absent, let's assume we are not actually doing any teacher referrals, we're going straight on IQ, everybody gets an IQ test. We would see that there would be underrepresentation anyway. So I will draw, this is the largest study of its type. There are many smaller studies that show teacher bias and stuff, but this is a large scale study based on the entire state of Georgia. And what's nice about Georgia, which makes it good to study this, is that Georgia has automatic referrals for identification purposes. If you get above a certain score in your state test, you're automatically referred for testing. So on the basis of automatic referrals, 5.2% of the students in Georgia are referred, right? Of those 5%, right, 86.3% is the ones who then are successful in passing through the assignment process and being formally identified, resulting in identification of 57% of them being identified, right? Now, these are all off the table. They've been automatically referred. So anybody else, or any other referrals are coming outside. This is from the 95% of these students who are not automatically referred. So teachers are referring an additional 4%. In addition to the 5.2% that get automatically referred on the basis of their achievement, teachers are referring 4% for testing. Now it's important to note, these are students with lower scores. The students that the teachers are referring have lower scores than these who have gotten the automatic referrals. So perhaps not surprisingly, only 75% of that group is successful, resulting in an identification rate of 37.7%. Right? And as we can see that the, you know, so then everybody else, so this 9% that's referred, parents could refer somebody who was not referred, a kid could decide to refer themselves. There are very low rates there. But as you can see, again, the success rate is even smaller in these groups, right? Now, what's interesting is when we look at the referral rate by race and by SES, right? And again, this is just for Georgia, but it's the best data that we have on this topic. So when we look at the automatic referrals, the dark green, and then we have low versus high SES. So low versus high SES, automatic referral, low SES, Asian, teacher referral, low SES. We see that the teachers are referring fewer students than the automatic referral. Same things for Asians, high SES. When we look at African Americans, teachers are referring comparable numbers to the automatic referrals for the low SES group. We see the typical pattern with the automatic referrals being more for the high SES African American group, but not for the low SES. So teachers are digging deeper here. Similarly for the Hispanic group, right? Again, not for the high group. For Native Americans, it's even, in fact, the teacher automatic referral is even higher. You know, it's a reverse pattern that we've been seeing for low income, low SES Native Americans, right? Go back to the traditional pattern. And then for whites, so at least in this sample, in the data from 2006, we'd have to look at these data over time, of course. Even white students that, in fact, in the low SES groups, teachers are actually putting kids forward who were not chosen automatically, and they're actually doing so at comparable rates of the automatic referrals for low SES students, even though they're not doing it for high SES referrals, right? So that's one set of data. A more recent study, right? Ricciardi et al. Did a study where they looked at in a district in Texas, I believe it was. I'm not sure about that. But they looked at white and Latino students, and they found that they were more likely to be identified as gifted than Black students. So this is actually controlling for poverty and early academic performance. That even, you know, that, so all other things being equal, white and Latino students are more likely to be identified than Black students. So there's some bias against Blacks in the system. They found that English language learners, boys and those who attended public school pre-K programs, were more likely to be identified, controlling for other factors. So again, there are things that are interacting, because English language learners, you know, are more likely to be identified, well, they're more likely to be Latino and Asian, actually. And then those who attend public preschool programs. So there are interactions here, right? And one of the things one wants to know is who's attending pre-K programs. So they did a hierarchical logistic regression predicting gifted placement for all students. And we look at step 3 here to see what are the things that are contributing. So English language status, right? Which one typically would think of as something that would result in you not being identified. In this context, they were being over-identified, right? Free reduced lunch, so there's poverty that's gone away. It's not significant, it's almost 1. Gender, males are being over-identified relative to females. We have whites and Asians being overrepresented next to Blacks, 1.9 times. Latinx, 1.3 times more likely to be identified than Blacks, the Hispanics and stuff. And white and Latinx, though, are less likely to be identified than white and Asians, right? Again, we're looking at preschool type, so this goes away, it goes down. If you have a center care-based preschool, it's a little lower. For the family care preschool, it's at 1. School readiness at age 4. These are all, you know, around 1, right? So that, in fact, having cognitive scores and so forth, but look, GPA in kindergarten. So your achievement level in kindergarten, trumping all of the other odds ratios. 4 times more likely to be identified. The higher your score, the higher your achievement in kindergarten, the greater the probability you are to be identified. Again, speaking to this notion of of achievement, right? Contributing. So conclusions, SES plays a role, race plays a role, blacks are disadvantaged, achievement level, higher achievement levels plays a role. Let's look at SES. Now we know that poverty is a marker variable, right? So this is the percentage of children under age 18 living in poverty by race and ethnicity. And not surprisingly, the groups with the lowest poverty levels are also the groups that are most likely, the ones who are overrepresented in gifted and talented education, right? And the groups that are underrepresented in gifted and talented education, right, are the ones with the higher poverty levels. So again, poverty is a marker variable. It has implications from prenatally, from nutrition and stress, to early childhood, to a later childhood and adolescence in terms of resources that the household has, right? When we look at people with college degrees, their kids are more likely to be enrolled in preschool, you know, leading to some of the positive outcomes, enrollment and GATE that we have seen before, right? That children in poor families hear fewer words than children in working class families. Children in working class families on welfare hear fewer words than children in working class families who hear fewer words than children from families where the parents are professionals, right? So in other words, if I didn't graduate from high school, I may be the word bath that my kid is going to get if I don't graduate from high school is less than the word bath of somebody who graduated from high school than the word bath of a kid who graduated in college. And not just the word bath, but also the type of feedback that's received, right? Where feedback to children is much more positive, a greater percentage is positive from professional families than other families. When we look at the correlations between sort of these SES or socioeconomic status variables and achievement, we find that a number of them, they are all correlated 0.3, 0.2, 0.2, 0.58 home atmosphere. So that in point of fact, this becomes most important. Now, of course, home atmosphere sometimes is related to parental occupation, parental education, and income level. But the important variable is home atmosphere, which we can teach to families is necessary. So that's the key variable, right? And that actually is giving us some capital. So students of poverty are generally less likely to be identified for gifted services even after controlling for prior math and reading achievement. Within districts, even after controlling for reading and math schools, poorer schools in a district have lower identification rates. So students of poverty are less likely to be identified for gifted students, and poor students in poor schools or low resource schools are even less likely to be identified as gifted. So we know that poverty plays a role. Hamilton and I show this so that in fact that the percentage of people who do not qualify for free and reduced lunch, a larger percentage of them are identified than the percentage of kids who receive free and reduced lunch, right? And stuff. Although I bring us back to the McBee study because teachers are recommending them at similar rates, but as we saw in the chart, that the kids who are not identified automatically, they are less likely to be identified even when they are referred forward. So poverty matters. So next one then, cultural variables. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, although I think it's critically important. We need to do a lot more research in this area. For me, the two critical variables here are identity and belonging, right? And identity is often determined by your sense of belonging. So here are some questions that, in fact, I think kids may ask themselves. Do I belong in this domain, right? Do I belong in this class or program? Should I be in this gifted education class? Do people like me engage in this domain, right? What if I like physics or mathematics, but I'm African American? Do I have role models who I see, who, you know, are there Black mathematicians that I know? Are there people in this program who look like me? How does my group perform in this domain, right? African Americans can look and see the NBA, which is, you know, has a large percentage of African Americans, the National Football League. Do they see a large number of Black mathematicians? Are there a sizable number of members of my group have been successful in this domain? And does success in this domain mean that I'm not a true member of the group that I belong to? And so ultimately, should I be trying to succeed in this domain? As Sandra Graham said, there are some kids who may say, I can, but do I want to? So these are the ones who may be able to, who may be doing very well, and could do it, but I can, but do I want to? So does identity do cultural variables matter? The answer is probably yes. How much does it contribute? We are not yet sure, and we still need to do a fair amount of research in this area. We've gotten better tools, right? Other data on the common explanations, right? So this idea that the tests are biased, this idea that the tests are biased, and so that this is the primary drive, these bias tests are a primary drive of disproportionality, right? I would argue that both IQ test and achievement tests reflect the achievement gap. So Hodges et al. Asked the question, do alternative measures result in different outcomes? Portfolios, interest in Tories, and so forth. So this is no disproportionality. This is the traditional measure, standardized IQ and achievement test. These are the non-traditional measures, the nonverbal test, portfolios, affective checklist, and so forth. As we can see, we moved the needle a little bit, 0.07, right? But there's still substantial disproportionality, right? And so that, in fact, moving to non-traditional measures will not solve the disproportionality issue, right? Again, I come back to these automatic referrals. So here is another thing, right? Well, if the tests are not biased, there's this group of hidden gifted kids out there who, if in point of fact we were only to test them, we would actually find them and so forth. And we are not testing them because we really, really don't want to place them in gifted and talented education programs. So there's a thing called universal screening, where in fact you give everybody, you test everybody, universal screening. And so here's a study where, the district, the blue line, no universal screening. The district with the red line, no universal screening, then it goes away. And we can see, yes, there's an increase in terms of the number of people who are being identified. But like the 0.27 to 0.34, look at the, so the identification rate here is between 0.035. At its highest, it becomes like 0.055. Again, we are making a difference, but not a substantial difference. That doesn't mean we just shouldn't do it. But again, universal screening is not going to solve the problem, right? It's not finding the hidden gifted that people think are on there. So my explanation for underrepresentation is there are long-standing and pervasive achievement gaps. Jonathan Plucker has called them excellent gaps at the upper end of the distribution. That's what we saw, the percentage of kids who, in point of fact, are scoring at the advanced level, right? One of my students, David Stevens, talks about this in terms of headwinds and tailwinds, right? That in fact, some students have tremendous tailwinds and very few headwinds. There are others who have very small tailwinds and tremendous headwinds, right? I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. When I'm flying from San Francisco to Miami, New York, or Washington, D.C., we get there in like 4 hours now, sometimes a little over 4 hours. But when I'm flying back home, it takes 5 hours, sometimes 6 hours, because the prevailing winds in the United States blow from west to east. So when I'm going to New York, when I'm going to the east, I have tailwinds behind me. I have strong tailwinds behind me and little headwinds. When I'm coming back home from the east, I have strong headwinds holding me back and little tailwinds. And so it takes longer. And so this idea that in fact, some students are starting further along than others, right? If my parents happen to be outstanding in a domain, basketball, acting, mathematics, writing, I am starting off in a different place, right, than students whose parents don't have those talents. If in fact, both of my parents happen to have doctoral degrees or graduate degrees or college degrees, I'm starting off in a different place than kids whose parents did not finish high school, right? And so we know that these things interact, right? Do I have stable housing? Am I attending, you know, stuff? Or am I homeless? You know, am I living in poverty, right? And so these things are going to matter. And again, we know there's this interaction. So race, ethnicity, and so forth interact are substantially correlated with socioeconomic status, as I've shown before. So, okay, so we've known this for a while, but why then, why is there no change for so long? There's no change for so long because we have not yet addressed the major problem, this achievement gap. So here are some data to show that. These are data from 1992 to 2017. Look, these lines are essentially flat. And yes, they're sloping upwards, but very, very gradually, right? And so this is the achievement gap for 4th grade reading, right? Same pattern, 8th grade reading. Same pattern, 12th grade reading. Same pattern, 4th grade mathematics. Same pattern, 8th grade mathematics. Same pattern, 12th grade mathematics. See, Hispanics, Blacks, American Indians at the lower end, whites, and Asian Pacific Islands at the upper end. We are seeing there's the scores, right? And Blacks, Hispanics, you know, American Indians are down, Asian Americans and European Americans have higher scores and stuff. Brings us back to these charts. So this is the difference between whites and Hispanics in grade 4 reading scores, 0.6 standard deviations, right? You can see again, smaller group, and we're choosing, if we're choosing, again, I'm using 130, but you know, this is the 0.7 standard deviations for whites and blacks. It's 0.8 standard deviations for Native Americans and whites. And it's a full standard deviation for English language learners and non-English language learners. So unequal performance, unequal academic performance is the primary driver of disproportionality. And it's important to know this so that we can address the cause of the problem. Given that this is what the problem is, the solution cannot come from gifted education alone. We can work at it, and I'll talk about ways we can do that, but it can't come from us alone, right? Let us look at these data again in slightly different ways, right? These are data of students. Now, remember those 4 NAEP scores, below basic, basic, proficient, and advanced. So these are people who are scoring in the basic or below basic levels. For American Indians, 81% in 2005, 80% in 2019. It's not really gone anywhere. Asian American Pacific Islanders, 60% in 2005 who was scoring below proficient. It's 45%. There's been a 15% change, right, in favor. 15% of them have moved up into the proficient or advanced levels. African Americans, 88% in 2005, 82%. So it's dropped by 6%, but still over 80% of African Americans are scoring below proficient. Hispanic or Latino, 85% to 77%. Again, it's dropped 8 points, but still greater than 75% of Hispanic or Latinx people's students are scoring at that level. 2 or more races, 68%, it's dropped to 60%, they've dropped down 8 percentage points. And with whites, 61%, 56%, right? So this is what these things look like, right? Scoring below proficient and percent proficient. You can see American Indian below proficient, proficient. Asian Pacific Islander below, there are more of them who are proficient than below proficient, right? It's the only group. Asians are the only group in which the percentage of students who are scoring at the proficient level is greater or above, is greater than the percentage scoring below proficient, right? Look at the disparities for African Americans, American Indians, Hispanics, and so forth, even 2 or more groups than whites. And what we are going to need to do, right, is we are going to need, before I do that, percent advanced. So look at the percent advanced there, percent advanced. For us to solve the problem, we need to move more kids from below proficient into proficient, more kids from proficient into advanced. That is the surefire way to increase or to decrease disproportionality in gifted education, you know, so that the underrepresentation levels go down so we get more equal. This problem here, if we had American Indians, African Americans, Hispanics, this percentage proficient, we would not have the disproportionality that we have, right? So that's why this is an uphill battle because it requires changes in attitudes, changes in policy, changes in behavior. We need to be better at educating kids of color who are not doing well. So with that, let's turn to some suggestions for identification. And I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. First, use local norms. Local norms should be used in the early grades. That means when you're identifying kids for gifted and talented programs, don't use the national norms we showed with the IQ disparities. Use the norms from the school so that, you know, and stuff, and you'll see what that means, right? So use norms for the school. Identify the kids who are the top performers in your school, not the kids who would be the top performers nationally for your programs. Also use, also use universal screening, right? Small wins, but a place to start. As I noted, while these do not shift the needle a lot, they do shift the needle, and it's important to use them. Have a gifted program and enrichment activities at every school site. This is the idea of using local norms to move those who are basic to proficient, to move the proficient to advanced. That's what we need to do. We need to do it, right? If we can, in fact, move kids from proficient to advanced, every kid we can move from proficient to advanced, we are creating a kid who can be, you know, who would be successful in a GATE program without additional supports, right? Choose curricula that allows students and their families from all backgrounds to see the contributions of the individuals who look like them. Address issues of perceived belonging on the part of students from traditionally underrepresented groups, right? Use multiple identification tools, screeners, nomination forms, academic work. You are really wanting to see, you are mining for talent, right? You are trying to see who are kids here who have potential. The big thing that we talk about in the talent development mega model is that when we are identifying in elementary school, we are identifying for potential, right? Education is supposed to make you better. So a kid who may be at the high end of basic, if we can identify that kid and give them enrichment, they may be able to move into proficient. The kid who is in proficient, who we identify and give enrichment and so forth, they can move into advanced, right? So you are mining, you are looking for multiple ways of finding talent. Broaden the grade levels where students are identified, right? So at least in the United States, 67% of the students in GATE programs are identified by grade 2, right? This is too early. I mean, so there are kids who may not do that well, but who thrive in school. They may not have gone to preschool, and so they haven't found their footing. If you were identifying grade 5 or grade 7, you would actually find more students. I encourage kids to, in fact, take honors and advanced placement classes rather than limiting those to specific kids. Though, because again, you want kids to, you want to have high expectations, and in fact, you don't want to put kids in there who are going to fail. So you're not going to put the kids who are at below basic. But a kid who is proficient may well do well in those classes, even though they're not yet at the advanced stage. And in fact, that could be the kind that gets them to the advanced stage. And finally, I have something what I call grow your own gifted students, right? So what does that mean? Build in whole class enrichment during the school year, separate from the regular curriculum and beginning in kindergarten. And you want to do this across multiple domains. You don't just want to do it in academic domains. I was not the most diligent student academically. I did okay. But, you know, I actually repeated a grade in school. And you know why I repeated a grade? Because I could have gone on to the pre-university classes in another school. But I chose to repeat at the school I was going to because of music. I was engaged in music at that school, and music is what had me coming to school. So you want to build in enrichment because you don't know what, in fact, the kid's passion is. And the passion, a kid may do okay in school, but their passion may not be the academics. And so you want to do enrichment across multiple subjects. You want to begin enrichment classes early and continue through the summer, especially for kids who are coming from homes with less social capital, right? So, right. And remember that the goal of enrichment classes is to teach kids to fall in love with the subject. As Benjamin Bloom said, early teachers are to teach you to fall in love with the subject, because as you move forward in a domain, things get more difficult. If you are passionate about it, you're more likely to persist. Think about the teachers who are teaching their subject. So the student, you know, math is often a problem for kids. Are the teachers who are teaching mathematics in your school, do they like mathematics? Are they happy teaching these classes? What are they communicating outside of the information what attitudes are they communicating to students, right? Have enrichment classes work on meaningful and interesting problems in age-appropriate ways. Joren Ruzuli's school enrichment program speaks about this, right? That you want to have kids be doing meaningful work that's age-appropriate. If you are using IQ as one of the criteria, use a cut score closer to 110 or 115 than 130, right? I mean, it's interesting, right, that we set this cut score so high, right? When we think about sport, for example, right, something like 50%, I think that may be in another slide, something like 50% of middle school students are engaged in sport, right? Fewer than 1% are in the National Football League, the National Basketball League, and so forth. But the pool that they start from is a much larger pool. It's not just the top 2% of students. Building learning and talent development opportunities outside of the regular school day, chess, math club, astronomy, cultural activities. Partner with local universities and community organizations to identify role models and tutors, right? So there may be many universities, at least in the United States, have fraternities and sororities. Some of them are cultural specific, African-American or fraternity, sorority. And so they can be role models for kids in your schools who are, people come from low income backgrounds. Celebrate student growth as much as you celebrate student success. Celebrate success in all domains and develop a talent development culture in schools and classrooms, beginning with kindergarten, that we can all get better if we put in the effort, right? Ultimately, right, giftedness is a characteristic of adulthood. It is developed over time with opportunities, effective teaching, and task commitment. We are interested in potential in childhood. As I mentioned before, 55% of middle and high school students participate in athletic teams, even though fewer than 1% of these individuals become professional athletes, right? So why do we limit the potential in academics to 2%, 130 IQ, or 5% or even 10%? To maximize the number of gifted adults, we need to maximize the pool of individuals with potential. That's why we need to, in fact, do enrichment more broadly and stuff. Ultimately, gifted equals to superior performance relative to peers in a domain, right? And that giftedness, that superior performance relative to peers, is a classification decision. We decide what gifted is, right? That's our classification decision, right? Conclusion, so the disproportionality in gifted education is driven primarily by disproportionality in the percentage of students performing at the highest levels in school. That's the primary reason. Current identification misses some students, but there's no substantially large group of gifted students from minority and low-income students who are deliberately being excluded. The students who are being excluded are the ones who are not making that 130 IQ cut, which I would argue is too high. We can change who the gifted are in schools by changing identification policies and practices. That's the way we'll change it. But in fact, we need to provide support to those students, because if we are broadening our identification, we do not want to set students up to fail. We need to provide the academic and social emotional supports to kids that we identify. So decreasing disproportionality in gifted education requires increasing achievement of all groups in general education. And that's a long-term endeavor. That's our uphill battle. That's, in fact, what we need to speak to politicians about. We need more money for gifted education, more money to, in fact, invest in doing the kinds of educational outreach that we need in all schools. And that's how we are going to solve this problem over time. Thanks for your attention, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. So question one, how do you interpret meritocracy from the aspect of diversity? How does it influence the screening process in gifted education? And I'm hoping people are hearing me. So with regard to question one, how do you interpret meritocracy from the aspect of diversity? I think, of course, when we think about gifted education, right, we think about the students at the top end of the distribution. And so certainly a student who is doing very well, we want to put in a gifted and talented program. We want to give them the education they want. When we come to diversity, of course, there are students from diverse groups. There are students from underrepresented groups who, in fact, will qualify on the basis of very high scores. But if we are interested in increasing the diversity in gifted and talented education programs, we also need to recognize that some students from underrepresented groups do not have the educational social capital. They do not have the scores that will qualify them in the normal process. And so that's why we talk about what do we want gifted to represent. If giftedness is going to be about adult performance, we need to give more children and adolescents the chance to develop into giftedness. And so that we can actually broaden the people that we have. We will take the ones who would make it in normally, but we can also, in fact, have criteria that allows us to do enrichment with other students who then, over the course of time, will actually increase their performance and can make contributions as adults, right? And so that's what it does for the screening process. It means that we need to broaden our screening process so that we are not just using an IQ of 130. We may then want to identify kids with IQs of 120, for example, who then we would give enrichment education, but we want to do those identifications as early as possible. We also want to make sure that we do identification throughout the education process for students who are later developing, who then get an opportunity to get in. So that's question one. With regard to question two, thank you so much. I'm curious, what is your vision on using dynamic testing for getting more diversity in gifted and talented education? I'm not sure what is meant by dynamic testing. I'm not familiar with that phrase. I'm thinking that, so what comes to mind for me is actually focusing on different aspects of testing so that, in fact, a student who may be very good in one domain but not another, and I'm fine with a student. Let's say there's a student who does not have an IQ score. And if you're using IQ score of 130, but is extremely good in mathematics or is extremely good in some other domain, that student should get gifted and talented education, even if they do not make the cut score, the general cut score on IQ. Because what you can do is you can use their performance in the domain to place them, because they will benefit from accelerated or enriched education in the specific domain. I hope as I said, I'm not familiar with the term dynamic testing, so I hope that that's what you are getting at. Is mentoring a possible way of supporting children of low SES? Yep, so I think it is one way that you can do it. I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we are doing in gifted and talented education is in fact doing educational supplemental education, right? So we are giving students a broader education, a deeper education, a more accelerated education than they would receive in their normal classrooms, right? If we are identifying students who don't have scores at the very top of the distribution, mentoring is one way of doing that. One of the things we have done at our program here at Berkeley is that when we have students who are coming from underrepresented backgrounds, students who in fact, their scores may not be quite as high as some of the other students' scores, we build in addition to their class, we build in a support with undergraduates at UC Berkeley who we use to support them. So they, instead of taking one class in the morning and then going home like all the other students do, or class in the afternoon, these students have a support lab on the other side of the day where they are getting sort of a small group or one-on-one support to help them engage with the material. And what we found is if we start that in around age 10, 11, 12, by the time the students are in the later aspects of high school, they don't need those support classes anymore. The mentoring in those early classes was sufficient to get them up to speed, because in essence we lift the boat. We bring them up. Question 4. Thank you for this insightful lecture. Do you think that positive discrimination can be a solution for underrepresentation? If yes, how can we be fair towards the overrepresented high achiever groups? This, of course, is one of the biggest concerns, I think, that comes up in this space, right? So in the United States, as a case in point, I'm at UC Berkeley, and we have 30% people of Asian Americans, even though they are not that percentage in the state. We only have 2% African Americans. The idea here is not to say, let's admit fewer Asian Americans and admit more African Americans, so that you don't want to just admit students. Students who have qualified, you want to admit them. What we're trying to do is broaden, right? So what we are saying is let's actually increase the number of kids that we are providing gifted education to, right? So that students from groups who are underrepresented get to see more and more of themselves in there. If we are successful in doing enrichment early on, and we continue to do this, I mean, it's a long-term strategy, but if we are successful, it will equalize over time as we will get people more into the population, right? So you will, as kids who were not who admitted with a lower score, but then they go through, they do well, their kids will get into these programs. So I think we need to be very careful that we are not excluding kids who have qualified via the normal way. We are just actually creating more spaces to serve more students from groups that have not qualified and have not typically qualified and who do not see themselves as part of this process. Thank you for your comment. Just a very interesting and important topic from multiple perspectives. I'm glad that you found it interesting. And my apologies to all of you for not being able to get the Microsoft Teams to work. Question 5. Dynamic testing is a form of testing where you measure the learning potential of children. So the children are not selected by score for the program, but by learning potential. Yep, so I would agree. This is the talent development approach, right? The problem is that it doesn't get rid. So I agree. We should be selecting kids on the basis of potential. But there are people who would argue that the IQ score is a measure of potential, right? So if we just go on potential, on scores that indicate high potential, we will still have underrepresentation. So that in and of itself will not take care of the problem of underrepresentation, because the groups that are now underrepresented are also underrepresented on the potential measures, right? So that's why we need to broaden who we serve in the early grades, because to give students who may not be showing the high potential that others are showing, but who have potential, we need to broaden it so that they get enriched education, so that when they are older, they actually qualify on the basis, of that learning potential. But it's not going to start there. We are not going to solve underrepresentation just with that, because the distribution, the unequalness of scores that we see that in every kind of test, even tests of potential. Can well-being and resilience be a focus of diversity programs? Right. So I would argue that resilience and well-being should be a part of all programs, including diversity programs. So, and let me explain what I mean by that, right? So many students who are doing well in school, right, they're doing very well. They find school very easily. Even in the gifted and talented program, they find that they're not being stretched. If their well-being is not taken into consideration, if they're not being taught to cope when things get hard, when things get hard for them, it may not be in middle school or high school, it could be in college, they are going to be less likely to be able to cope. So we really need to teach coping skills, teach processes to be resilient to all kids. With regard to diversity programs in particular, one aspect of resilience, if we think about it, is social, right? Do I believe that I can succeed in this domain? Are there people who look like me who have succeeded in this domain? And so that's one of the reasons why it's important to get students from underrepresented groups and have a cohort, because so then you want to teach them, right? But you also want to teach them skills. It's not enough to teach, to talk about well-being and resilience, right? We need to teach them to do good work in the domain. So you need to do both the social emotional supports as well as the academic work. They need to get both, I would argue. Thank you. Next question. Should gifted education programs specialize according to domains? So I would say yes, yes, but. So yeah, I do think that in fact, one way of serving more kids and increasing diversity is to specialize by domains. And the talent development mega model that Dr. Ozdravsky Kobilius, Dr. Zabotnik, and I have done speaks to the importance of domains. So if somebody is very good in science, they should be accelerated, get enrichment in science. If somebody is very good in mathematics, they should accelerate, get that in mathematics. So that's true. What we do know, though, right, is that some students don't necessarily know what domains they're good in, right? So that's why IQ has traditionally been used as a measure to identify kids for gifted and talented education, because IQ is a general purpose academic indicator. So IQ is a general indicator of learning potential across domains, so that if you actually have students who have high IQs, it actually is saying that they are probably going to do well academically, right? So then they can then choose where they want to specialize, but they have general learning potential that you can actually then expose to a variety of domains. And some of them may then get to choose on their passion. So if I'm equally good in mathematics, science, and humanities, language arts, I again get to choose which is the passion for me, which I like best, and then I can choose that domain to specialize in. But domains is a really important place to think about, particularly for those who don't have the highest IQs. As president of APA, what do you think? Where's the place of educational psychology, gifted education in the 21st century? New tendencies, new paradigms. That's an interesting question. What I will say is this. It really is important, I think, to expose children and young children, especially children in elementary school, to a wide range of domains, topics, and so forth, and not just academic domains. So the academic domains, but sport, the visual and performing arts, and so forth. While the purpose of schooling is academics, there are many students who may be talented in an area that is not an academic area. They may be talented in football. They may be talented in music, and so forth. But if they do not get exposure, right, we are not going to know that they have talents in those domains. Individuals who are underrepresented, often, one group is individuals from low-income households. So if they do not have the wherewithal, the funds, the money to allow their students to follow their passions, their non-academic passions, and the school does not expose the students to these passions, their students will never discover that they have talents. And so from my point of view, what our task is in the 21st century is really to ensure that all children, as many children as possible, but ideally all children, get exposed to as wide a variety of domains as possible for a number of years in their early educational experiences, so that we can discover where their passions are, where their talents lie, and ultimately maximize the amount of individuals from all backgrounds who end up being able to develop their talents. And if we think about new things, right, we now have, there's now snowboarding, right? So skiing used to be the ultimate sport. There's now a sport called snowboarding. And so that's a new sport that has come on board. Somebody came up with the idea of snowboarding as opposed to skiing. We now have people who are doing visual and performing arts on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, right? And so they're developing skills in manipulating content and so forth. These are all things that would not have happened if these platforms did not exist. And so there always needs to be room to see what's the new thing. And as we come up with new things, some people whose talents may not have been recognized before, we now have the opportunity to recognize their talents in these new platforms or on these new platforms. Okay, here's another question. Is bringing more children to level of proficiency mainly education policy? No, I think it's not. I think it goes beyond policy. I mean, I really do think it goes to the heart of education practice. So I'm going to use some numbers here. I'm making up these numbers as an explanation to clarify the explanation. So we know, for example, that 80% of African-American youth in the United States, for example, are reading below basic. Nobody believes that 80% of African-American youth are intellectually disabled, right? The percentage of youth who are intellectually disabled or reading disabled is much smaller, right? It's a much smaller percentage of the population. What this means is that there are a lot of students who are actually have average or above average intelligence who in fact are not reading at proficient level, right? And so therefore what that says to me is that our education practice, our teaching is not effective. And so what we need to do is we need to investigate where is this disconnect happening. Are we not using, for instance, the most effective reading tools to teach reading and mathematics? Are the teachers having low expectations for these students? Do we need to train the teachers to have high expectations and so forth, therefore engage the students more? So but all of these are practice issues. They're not just policy issues. We need to put policies in place to do these things. But ultimately, the rubber hits the road. It's going to be important to change what teachers are doing with these kids in the classrooms. That's where we're going to make the difference. And I think that's what we need to put a lot of attention to, right? And so we really need to identify why is this going on. So we need to do studies saying, what is the problem here? And then target the solution to that problem. Do you think that positive discrimination can be a solution for underrepresentation? If yes, how can it refer towards the overrepresented high achiever? I thought I had asked that one already, but what I was saying is, again, that I don't think, right, I guess one way to put this is, I'm not so sure that I would call broadening our base of students positive discrimination. I'm not sure I'd call it discrimination, right? So I'm going to again use the United States as an example, right? We have a situation in the United States whereby some families have more money than others. Their parents have more education than others, and so forth. Therefore, the things that they get in their homes, the students whose parents are professionals, who have college degrees, university degrees, they are actually able to give more educational press at home to their kids than kids of children whose parents do not have those high educational degrees, whose parents are making less money and are spending more time in work, right? Similarly, many of those people who are coming from poorer families, they live in neighborhoods where the schools that their children go to have less resources. Their teachers may be have less credentials, may not have had as many in-services, right? So what happens is we are having, and so we have a group of students who are in fact getting less, both at home and at school, right? What broadening the base is actually allowing students who are getting less, having schools give those students more, right? In other words, to make an example, if perfect education is a 10, right? And there are some students who come from homes where they're getting 5, their home has 5 and the school has 5. What about the students who are coming from a home where the home has 2 and their school has 3? What we are saying is that the schooling for the kids who have less at home, who are bringing less, that those schools need to be giving more so that those kids have the same shot, right? And since those kids are coming in with less to begin with, they are less likely to be placed in gifted programs. So if we do not, in fact, have enrichment programs in school, if we do not have quality programs during the summer for them, where, they will not ever get a chance to demonstrate the gifts and talents, to develop their gifts and talents. The majority of the students who come to our program in the summer, right, and there's a fee to come. It's not a high fee, but there's a fee. Their parents can afford to pay. But we also give scholarships to kids from poorer families whose talents need to develop, but who cannot afford to pay. So that's the idea. So I don't see so it's positive discrimination in the sense, but it's not discrimination in the sense that it's equalizing. We are not taking away from the kids who are already qualifying. We are just giving to more kids so that they can also benefit from these talent development opportunities. So thank you for your questions. So again, sorry I was not able to engage with you more directly on the Microsoft Teams platform.
Dear participants, dear ECHA members, I'm sure we would all be glad if all of us present now in this virtual space could actually meet face to face, smile at each other, and discuss the conclusion of the presentations we have heard. But this is a different situation now. Unfortunately, the organizers of the next ECHA conference in Porto are in a situation very similar to ours. A few weeks ago, they had to take a hard decision and to go online. I personally was very sad to hear that because I could hardly wait to meet the ECHA friends again after so many months of seclusion. For a brief break and inspiration, let's take a look now at a short film sent by the organizers of the next Porto conference scheduled for August 2021.
Dear friends and colleagues of European Council for High Abilities, thank you. Thank you for all your kind message following the decision to change the format of the 7th conference into a completely virtual event. Although we were very much looking forward to receiving you all here in Porto, the uncertain current pandemic situation has made us reconsider, and the decision to change our conference into a completely virtual format was taken, together with the European Council for High Abilities General Conference.
To allow more time for authors to share their knowledge and their research results, the deadline to submit the papers for this new virtual conference format is extended until 31 of March. We look forward to receive your contributions.
The program will be built around the conference theme that is even more relevant in the present situation of the world.
It's not the pandemic that is going to stop you from feeling the warmth and kindness of Porto and its citizens in this online conference. We look forward to see you on 31 of August.
We look forward to see you on the 31 of August.
We look forward to see you on 31 of August.